Okay, in this lesson we're going to discuss callbacks yet again. This time we're going to show how you can actually use callbacks in existing functions, in existing JavaScript functions. And we're actually going to take a little bit of time to work with the DOM, the document object model. So I'm going to add in my index.html and my app.js. So you've seen me type in document.write in the past. And it's not really a great way to modify the window. That's not typically what we would want to do. Instead of using document.write, let's actually create a div in our index.html. We'll give it an ID of message. Okay. And now inside of our function here, we're going to call document, but now we're going to say add event listener. Okay. So this add event listener allows us to pass in a particular event we want to listen to, in which case we're going to do DOM content loaded. And the case on that is extremely important. Okay. So we're going to actually pass in a callback function here, our event listener, in which case I'm just going to call it init. And for now we're going to use false for this use capture boolean. Okay. And that's just how events are bubbled up, and we're not going to get into that right now. But for now, just know I'm passing in false there. Now I'm going to actually create a function called init. And here I'm going to say, okay, so document get element by ID message. Okay, so now I have a element called message that I've kind of associated to this variable msg. Okay, so now I can actually say msg enter text equals hello there. So let's run this. And we don't get any results. Now I wasn't expecting that. Okay, I see here I just made an anonymous function and not a self-executing anonymous function. So let's try this again. And now we actually see hello there. So again, what this is doing is inside of our anonymous function, our self-executing anonymous function, that's getting loaded from our script tag here in our index. While we're here, let's go and change this to lang equals en. We have a div element with an ID of message. Okay. So when this function gets executed the first time, it creates this init function, and then it says, hey, I want to add an event listener so that when the content is loaded, that means when the index.html is done loading all the content, we want to call this function. So we're going to use this callback called init that we made. Okay. So in our init function, we're declaring our own variable here called msg. We're saying that to this actual element. So we're grabbing this element, grabbing it by ID. Okay. Now that we have that, we can set the inner text of that element. So let's say over here we had a button. Put this button inside of a form. Okay. So inside of this button, we're going to say hello. So now that we have set up this button say hello, we're going to go back to our app.js And for now, I'm going to copy this function, call it say hello, and then the init, I'm just not going to do anything at this point. Initialization code goes here. So now what I want to do is actually hook up this function to this button. Okay. So I'm going to say button equals button say hello. Okay. Then I'm going to say button on click equals say hello. Now since I put this in a form, this button in a form, one more thing I need to do is say the type of this is equal to button, because it defaults to a submit, and if we do a submit, it'll actually post back the form, kind of does a page refresh, and so our information will disappear. Okay, but we'll run this. Now we see our say hello. I'll click it, and now we get to see the hello there text. Okay, so in both of those cases, we're using a callback. So in this case here, we're using the document add event listener, registering for a particular event. Hey, when the content's outloaded from the DOM, call my init function. Okay, so it does, and when it's done, it actually calls our init function, calls back to us. Okay, the next thing we do is we then get the button and we say, okay, well now I want to set a callback for the on-click event. So if somebody clicks this button, call my function called say hello. And of course we just have the say hello, which actually grabs that message and sets the inner text. Okay. And so that's how you can use callbacks in existing JavaScript methods when you're trying to work with the document object model. Now this method of using the callback on the button like this is actually called unobtrusive JavaScript. If we were, let's say we were in global space here, we put this say hello up here, and just so this doesn't get called, I'm going to not make it self-executing. Okay. And now that we have this say hello in our global space, we could have actually come down here and say, okay, well, on click equals say hello. Now when we click say hello, we get hello there. But that's considered obtrusive JavaScript because we're actually putting the JavaScript function on the click event itself inside of here. And so you typically want to avoid that. Okay. And that also meant that I had to put the say hello into global space. And of course that's not what we want to do. Okay. Turn that back into self-executing. So now let's run this, just make sure we haven't messed anything up. We're still running the way we were before. Say hello brings us hello there. Okay.